All right, before we get going, I want to just introduce our presiding judge. This is Judge Mark Bernstein. Judge Bernstein was judge in the Court of Common Pleas in Philadelphia for 30 years, where he presided over more than 500 trials. He's also the author of Bernstein on Evidence, which is the Bible for any Pennsylvania lawyer who tries cases. One of my first assignments as a first-year associate at Klein Inspector was finding a copy of Bernstein on Evidence for Mr. Klein. And just like this law school, if he puts a stamp of approval on it, it must mean it's good. Judge Bernstein was also my professor when I was a student at Drexel Klein. He taught Pennsylvania practice, and he also teaches advanced evidence. So that's a long way of saying you guys are in good hands. With that, Judge Bernstein, your courtroom.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
Please be seated. It's my courtroom, but it's a slightly different venue, so I'm not quite sure of the procedure.
I think we'll have some pretrial matters, and then we'll get going.
Are there any pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor.
Let's start by identifying ourselves, actually.
Good afternoon. My name is Danielle Dhari. That's D-H-A-R-I. On behalf of the plaintiff, the estate of Patrick Schaefer.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Caprecia Camper Young. First name spelled C-A-P-R-E-C-I-A. Last name, two last names. Camper spelled C-A-M-P-E-R hyphen Young. Y-O-U-N-G. And when the court is ready, we have a few preliminary matters and some motions eliminated.
Okay, let me get the names of everyone who's going to speak, and then we'll come back and we'll just sort of inventory everything we have, and then we'll start. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Sydney Gaskins, Gaskins. Today I represent the defendant, the Klein County Dragons, and I'm joined by my co-counsel.
Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Kensy Cotter, C-O-T-T-E-R.
Okay, so plaintiff, you have some matters. Why don't you just list them for me?
Yes, Your Honor. During our meet and confer, we were successful and able to come to a few stipulations for exhibits to admit at this time. We were able to confer and admit exhibits 1, 3, 7, 9, 19, 20 through 25.
Okay, is that it? Correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, they're all accepted into evidence.
Yes, Your Honor. And we also have a copy of the record here if Your Honor would like one for your convenience.
Sure.
May I approach?
Yes. What else do we have pre-trial?
During the course of trial, Your Honor, counsel may ask to approach for a sidebar. We ask that this be done constructively and that we be able to stay at counsel table so that other evaluators may hear our arguments.
Absolutely.
Your Honor, we ask that we be able to use the well during opening statement and closing argument.
By the well, you mean walk over here?
Your Honor, in front of the jury box and whatnot.
As long as you're not in anybody's lap, that will be fine.
Understood, Your Honor. The exhibits in today's trial have already been pre-marked, and we ask that they retain their original numbers. Therefore, they might come into evidence out of order.
Surely, that's not a problem, is it?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
Your Honor, plaintiff also asked to use Exhibit 1 during opening statements, and this is an exhibit that we've already pre-admitted per our
Right,
pretrial stipulation.
no problem.
And would Your Honor prefer that we formally tender our witnesses today?
Tender your,
Our witnesses today, our expert witnesses.
you mean identify them?
Tender them as professionals in the field, Your Honor.
Oh, I see. You mean qualify them, as,
Yes, Your Honor.
in my words. Okay. Do we have a need to qualify the witnesses, or can we proceed straight to their testimony, assuming they have expertise?
That's fine, Your Honor.
Okay. And does any judge object? Yes, we will do that then.
So just to be clear, Your Honor, we are formally tendering our witnesses?
Fine, yes.
Expert witnesses? With that, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to move on to motions.
What motions do you have? Just identify them, please.
Yes, Your Honor. We have one stipulated motion and then one motion to bring to the court's attention.
All right, let's start with the stipulated one.
The stipulated motion we have is to exclude any testimony from the defendant's expert about blood alcohol content outside the four corners of Exhibit 3, which is a toxicology report.
Is that stipulated to?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, got it.
And then we have one unstipulated motion to discuss.
And what is the motion?
The motion is to exclude any mention of other sports teams changing their alcohol safety cutoff. May I provide a background?
No, we're just documenting. We're just creating a catalog of what we're going to do. What does the defense have to discuss pre-trial?
We oppose that motion, Your Honor.
And that's it? You have no motions of your own?
Ms. Cotter will be handling the motions that we talked about in meet and confer with opposing counsel after the plaintiff is done.
Are there any pretrial motions that the defense has to present to the court before we begin openings?
Your Honor, the parties have met and conferred and were able to reach two substantive stipulations. Can I read those onto the record now?
Yes.
Both parties agreed to exclude any mention that the Dragons changed their alcohol policy after Patrick Schaefer died under Rule 407.
Okay.
And the second stipulation, Your Honor, is that both parties agreed to exclude any evidence of two prior alcohol-related incidents at the Dragon Stadium.
I'm sorry, two prior incidents?
Yes, Your Honor, unrelated to this case.
Okay. These two are stipulated to?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Okay. And do you have any motions that need to be argued?
No, Your Honor.
Fine. So we're up to your one motion.
Yes, Your Honor. By way of background, this is a case about how the defendant's baseball stadium was negligent and how their negligence led to the death of one of their guests, Patrick Schaefer. Their alcohol policy was supposed to be a seventh inning alcohol policy, but they eliminated it. And on top of that, they overserved Patrick Schaefer while he was visibly intoxicated. These things led to his death. The plaintiff's motion is to exclude any testimony of other sports teams eliminating their alcohol safety cutoff after the seventh inning, after the date of April 8th, 2022, as irrelevant under Federal Rule of Evidence 401.
Your motion is to exclude activity by other companies after the date of this incident, correct?
Correct, specifically that they changed the cutoff for when they can sell alcohol at their stadiums.
Okay. Defense?
Yes, Your Honor, we oppose this motion because that evidence is incredibly probative. It was only a year later, and the fact that other baseball teams in the same industry as the Dragons extended their alcohol cutoffs past the seventh inning makes it more reasonable that the Dragons did the same. The jury needs to hear what the industry is doing today in order to decide whether the Dragons' policy was reasonable. Therefore, we oppose the motion.
Did the Dragons change their policy?
Yes, Your Honor, the Dragons changed their policy from having a seventh inning alcohol cutoff to extending alcohol sales through the ninth inning.
Might be lost, but didn't you stipulate that that change could not be offered into evidence?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, I am lost. Explain my confusion.
Your Honor, the
How
fact...
can I explain your confusion, Judge? No, let's back up. I'm
Yes.
sure I'm the only one in the courtroom confused, but I
Yes,
am.
Your Honor, I can.
Let's back up. Other teams change their policy to what?
Yes, I can try to explain. So other teams had a cutoff in the seventh inning that they wouldn't be selling alcohol in their stadiums after the seventh inning.
Right.
After this date of April 8th, 22, at some point in the next year, a few baseball teams changed their alcohol safety cutoff and allowed those teams to sell alcohol through the end of the ninth inning.
Okay.
Or the end, my apologies, the end of the eighth inning.
7 to 8, okay. And what was the Dragons' policy?
So the Dragons' policy, they had originally a policy not to sell alcohol after the seventh inning. And then in November of 2021, so before the date that Patrick Schaefer died, they changed their policy to a ninth inning cutoff. The stipulation that we came to with opposing counsel was not to mention that after the date of Patrick Schaefer's death, the stadium actually changed their policy back to a seventh inning cutoff. That was stipulated out, that we won't go into any discussions of the defendant stadium changing their policy back to a seventh inning cutoff. Our motion is to exclude the other teams after the death from changing their policies as well.
From 7 to 8?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay, yes, and what's this probative of? The standard in the industry?
The reasonableness of the Dragons' alcohol policy, which was to sell alcohol past the seventh inning. In order for the jury to be able to determine the reasonableness of that policy, they need to be able to compare the Dragons to other baseball stadiums in the same industry. That's what this evidence is going to show.
Okay, and the other sports teams in the same industry had what policy before this incident?
A seventh inning cutoff, like the Dragons.
And you want to offer into evidence the fact that despite this incident, some sports teams changed their policy to the eighth inning, later in the game.
Absolutely, Your Honor, that other sports teams are moving in the same direction as the Dragons, which tends to show their policy was more reasonable.
Right, and isn't that reasonableness exactly what the jury has to decide?
Absolutely, it's probative, Your Honor.
Okay.
Your Honor,
Is there anything further defense?
No, Your Honor.
Anything further plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. The reasonableness of the defendant's decision to change their policy has to be taken with the information they had at the time that they changed their policy, which was before the death of Patrick Schaefer. Not the reasonableness of what it would have been if they had known other sports teams had changed their policy after, but based on the knowledge that they had at the time that they made that decision. That's what the jury should be judging the reasonableness of the decision on.
Fine. Anything further, since that was extensive?
Yes, Your Honor. That's not exactly correct. The jury can decide the reasonableness of the decision at the time, but the jury also has to decide the reasonableness of the policy as a whole. Was it reasonable for the Dragons to have a ninth inning cutoff instead of a seventh inning cutoff? That's what this evidence goes to show.
It's not the reasonableness at the time of the drinking in this case? That's what the jury has to decide?
They have to decide that, but also whether the policy itself was reasonable.
Okay. Thank you all. The motion in limine is granted.
And that is all for the plaintiff's motions. We are ready for trial.
So we start with opening statements, correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
Whenever you're ready.
May I proceed? The Klein County Dragons baseball team, the defendant in this case, is losing millions of dollars. You see, the 2020 pandemic canceled one of their seasons, and then there was a new league rule that shortened games. So they had to find a way to make up for all that lost profit. So they came up with this idea to eliminate their alcohol safety cutoff. You see, the team has a policy of not selling alcohol to fans after the seventh inning. It's a policy that's in place because they don't want fans drinking right before driving home. It's a policy that's been in place since the stadium first opened. It's a policy that's considered the industry standard by almost every other baseball team in the country. But the defendants, they decide to eliminate that alcohol safety cutoff because according to them, there's no downside. But just a few days into the 2022 season, a young father named Patrick Schaefer is overserved by the defendant's undertrained employees and dies in a car accident on his way home from their game. Because today you'll learn there was a downside to getting rid of that alcohol safety cutoff. The downside was death. Now, as the plaintiff in today's case, we've brought a claim of negligence against the defendant stadium. And as the judge will instruct you, that means that we have to prove by a preponderance of the evidence, or simply more likely than not, that when the stadium made the decisions to get rid of their alcohol safety cutoff and to serve Patrick Schaefer while he was visibly intoxicated, that those were unreasonable decisions. And we'll meet our burden. Because the evidence you'll hear today will show you two things. First, that the defendant overserved Patrick Schaefer. And second, that they unreasonably eliminated their alcohol safety cutoff to increase profits. So let's take a look at the first thing that the evidence will show, that the defendant overserved Patrick Schaefer. Members of the jury, before we really get into it, there's someone I'd like you to meet. This is Sydney Schaefer. She's Patrick Schaefer's widow, the mother of their child. She was his wife. Patrick Schaefer is no longer with us because the defendant decided to overserve Patrick Schaefer while he was visibly intoxicated. Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. You're going to hear today about how the defendant trains their employees to serve alcohol to their guests, but you're not going to see any sort of training manual. You're not going to see a training video. You're not even going to get to hear about some extensive lecture that they get about how to do it safely. Because instead, you're going to see one sheet of paper. It's part of their 1 hour of training that makes up their one Q&A session. But despite that, the plaintiff's employees continued to serve Patrick Schaefer while he's visibly intoxicated. And you're going to learn that because Sydney Schaefer is going to get on this witness stand and tell you that that's exactly what happened. Their employees were trained to look out for things like slurring, stumbling, talking loud, all things that Sydney Schaefer is going to tell you her husband was doing at the game that day. And members of the jury, it's true that Patrick Schaefer made the choice to buy all those drinks, but the judge will instruct you that the defendant can still be held liable for continuing to serve him anyways if he's showing those signs of intoxication. Sam Corey is also going to get on this witness stand and tell you about the alcohol safety standards, which leads me to the second thing the evidence will show, that the defendant unreasonably eliminated their alcohol safety cutoff to increase profits. Sam Corey is going to tell you that those standards, they come from an organization called the Team Coalition. It's made up of representatives from every major sports league in this country. They set the alcohol safety standards for guests. When it comes to baseball, the industry standard is to stop selling alcohol in the 7th inning. And that's exactly what the defendant stadium did for the first 8 or so years that they were open. But then they decide to eliminate that policy. You're going to get to see the email where that initial suggestion to eliminate the alcohol safety cutoff is first made. The email where they say there's no downside to getting rid of it. And it wouldn't be until 5 months later that they'd actually be inviting guests back to their stadium. But in those 5 months, they didn't do any additional training for their employees, no additional warning signs, no additional safeguards. And just 4 days into the new season, Patrick Schaefer goes to one of their games and he doesn't come home. Because today you're going to learn that there was a downside to getting rid of an alcohol safety cutoff. The downside was death. The death of Patrick Schaefer. That's why at the end of this trial, my co-counsel is going to get up here and she's going to ask you to return the only just verdict. A verdict making the people that went to the defendant's stadium more important than the profits that they could make off of them. A verdict finding the defendant liable for the death of Patrick Schaefer.
Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
May it please the court. He chose to drink. He chose to drive. It's a warm night in April. It's the start of the baseball season. Thousands of fans, families, and children are pouring out of the Dragons Stadium. Families are getting into their cars. Cars are leaving the gates and heading home. But there's one car that's swerving back and forth all over the road. There's one car that can't seem to stay on the road. There's one car that shouldn't be on the road. Because the person behind the wheel of that car is drunk. Because the person behind the wheel of that car just had 10 drinks and then drove. He chose to drink. He chose to drive. Members of the jury, what happened to Patrick Schaefer is horrible. 2 children lost their father. A woman lost her husband. We are sorry for their loss. And just because Patrick Schaefer made a mistake by choosing to drink and drive doesn't make this any less horrible. But the evidence will show that it's just not the Dragons' fault. Members of the jury, this is Alex Britton. He's the president of business operations for the Dragons. He loves baseball. And he cares about the fans who come to the stadium. He's going to tell you about all of the measures the Dragons take to keep their fans safe. But he's also going to tell you there's only so much that they can do. Because at a certain point, people are responsible for their own behavior. The plaintiff, they have a burden of proof today. They have to prove to you that it's more likely than not that the Dragons are at fault for Patrick Schaefer's death. We also took on a burden. We have to prove to you that it's more likely than not that Patrick Schaefer's own negligence caused or contributed to his death. There are 2 simple facts that show you how the plaintiff can't meet their burden and how we meet ours. The park was safe. The plaintiff wasn't. So let's take those one by one. Starting with the first, the park was safe. A moment ago, opposing counsel told you that the Dragons' training was limited to 1 sheet of paper, 1 training, and 1 Q&A session. Members of the jury, today you're going to learn that the Dragons' training of their employees was short, simple, and commonsensical. You're going to see exactly how those employees were trained. Don't sell alcohol to anyone who's slurring. Don't sell alcohol to anyone who's stumbling. Don't sell alcohol to anyone who even looks drunk. You're going to hear that every single employee, the servers, the concessions people, anybody who sold alcohol was given these same instructions. And it wasn't limited to just 1 sheet of paper. You're going to hear that those same employees underwent training for a month after they got that presentation. A moment ago, the plaintiff told you that the Dragons overserved Patrick Schaefer at their stadium. You'll learn that that's simply not true. You're going to learn that the plaintiff deposed all of the vendors that came down the aisle, all of the concessions workers, that served Patrick Schaefer that night. You'll learn that none of them remembered Patrick Schaefer acting drunk. None of them even remember Patrick Schaefer at all. You'll hear that there were 38 other people that were sitting around Patrick Schaefer in the stands. You'll hear that the plaintiff interviewed all 38 of them. None of them remembered Patrick Schaefer slurring. None of them remembered Patrick Schaefer talking loud. None of them remembered Patrick Schaefer at all. The plaintiff told you that the Dragons unreasonably eliminated their safety cutoff to increase profits. Today, you're going to learn that the Dragons extended their safety cutoff. That's true. That they did it because they wanted to make more money. That's true too. But you're not going to hear any evidence that that decision was unreasonable or unsafe. You're going to learn that the Dragons weren't the only stadium in 2022 that sold alcohol past the 7th inning. You're going to hear about a major league team that did the same thing. And you're not going to hear any evidence that that major league team was any less safe than stadiums that had a 7th inning cutoff. In fact, listen for any evidence that an alcohol cutoff actually prevents accidents. Listen for any evidence that an alcohol cutoff actually saves lives. We trust that the plaintiff won't be able to bring you that evidence today. Which brings us to our second point. The park was safe. The plaintiff wasn't. The evidence of Patrick Schaefer's behavior will be undisputed. Undisputed that he chose to drive to the stadium that day. Undisputed that he chose to drink vodka, beers, his wife's drinks. Undisputed that he chose to drink until his blood alcohol content was over double the legal limit. 10 drinks. And then drove. You're going to hear that this accident didn't happen on stadium property, or with a stadium vehicle, or with the stadium's keys. You'll hear that the only person who was in charge of those keys was Patrick Schaefer, and Patrick Schaefer alone. That's why we'll ask that you find the Dragons not responsible for his death, because he chose to drink, and he chose to drive. Thank you.
Thank you. Call your first witness.
Plaintiff calls Kensy Schaefer. Good afternoon. Please introduce yourself to the jury and tell us what you do for a living.
Hello, I'm Sydney Schaefer, and I work as a paralegal.
Are you familiar with someone named Patrick Schaefer?
Yes, Patrick Schaefer was my husband.
What do you mean when you say was?
The night of April 8th of 2022, he got into a car accident, and he passed away.
Your Honor, I have a photo which has already been admitted into evidence as Exhibit 1. May I publish it by holding it up for the jury to see?
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer, how long were you and your husband married?
Me and my husband were married since 2016, married 6 years.
And did you two have any children together?
We did. We have two beautiful children, Paula and Edward, both 3 and 5.
You mentioned that your husband died on April 8th, 2022. What were you two doing that day?
We had gone to the Klein County baseball game. It was a thing that the two of us loved to do together for date nights.
How'd you two get to the game that day?
Patrick drove us to the game.
You mentioned earlier that you had kids. Did you bring them with you?
Oh no, it was a date night, so we had actually left the kids with a babysitter at home.
So when you first get to the stadium, where'd you go?
Well, we walked in and we grabbed some food, grabbed some drinks before we headed to our seats.
What kind of drinks did you get?
We grabbed 2 drinks, 2 Surfside beverages.
What's a Surfside?
It's a mixed drink. It has both iced tea and vodka.
And who drank those 2 Surfsides?
Patrick drank 1.5. I only drank half, and so he had some of mine.
So after you bought those food and those Surfsides, where'd you go next?
We went to our seats for a little bit to watch some of the game.
Would you recognize a photograph of those seats if I showed it to you?
I should, yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness with what's already been admitted as Exhibit 9? Ms. Schaefer, I'm handing you what's already been admitted into evidence, my apologies, as Exhibit 9. Do you recognize it?
I do.
What is it?
It is a picture of the seats that we were sitting in.
Your Honor, permission to publish these to the jury by handing them out for them to see?
Yes, that'd be fine. Actually, you could give a pile of them to one of the jurors and they could pass them
Great.
around.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Schaefer, I'm going to hand you a Sharpie right now. If you could please circle the seats that you and your husband were sitting in.
Yeah, so we were sitting in the first 2 seats over in Section A, so right over here.
Your Honor, permission to preserve the demonstrative exhibit as Plaintiff's Exhibit 1.
Yes, that'd be fine, and at some point you can let that circled picture be seen by all the jurors closer.
Yes, Your Honor. So you mentioned that you bought these from a concession stand. Did you ever go back to that concession stand throughout the game?
Yes, we did.
And what did you guys buy then?
We bought 2 Coors Lights.
And what about before you bought those Coors Lights? Did your husband have anything else to drink before that?
Yes, he did. There was some time where I'd gone to the bathroom, caught up with an old friend. He had bought some drinks then.
Referring you to the second inning, did your husband buy any drinks then?
Yes,
What did he buy?
he bought some more Surfsides.
Was it Surfside or was it another Coors Light?
It was another Coors Light. He had bought in another one at that point.
Now, is there a difference between those cans of Surfside and the cans of Coors Light?
Yes, there is. So the Coors Light is beer, but they're 24-ounce cans, so they're the equivalent of 2 drinks.
You just mentioned that you had gone to the bathroom at some point during the game. When you came back to your seat, what was your husband doing?
He was drinking those teas.
What about later in the 9th inning? Did your husband have anything to drink then?
He did as well. He had some Michelob Ultras then.
Do you know how many Michelob Ultras he had?
I believe he had almost 2.5.
Let's talk a bit about your husband's demeanor throughout the game. Was your husband acting any differently at all?
Yes, there came a point as the game started going on that he started slurring his words. He was looking a little intoxicated at that point.
What other signs of intoxication other than slurring words did he exhibit?
He was stumbling a little bit, getting really excited about some of the stuff that was happening during the game.
Now, you mentioned just now that he had bought some some Michelob Ultras in the 9th inning. Who did he buy those from?
He bought them from the Dragon County employees, the vendors that were serving alcohol at the stadium.
Do you know if he had bought any drinks from that same vendor before the 9th inning?
Yes, the vendor came up to him and said, "You again?" and gave him more drinks.
And was that before or after he started showing these signs of intoxication?
It was after.
Now, I want to talk to you a bit about what happened after the game. Did you and your husband have any plans after the game?
No, we had to get back to our children.
So when you first left the stadium, what did you do?
When we first left the stadium, I looked at my phone. I had gotten 5 missed calls from our nanny. I started panicking. We started trying to look for some car service to get home to the kids.
Did you try calling her back?
I did. I tried calling her once and twice, and she wouldn't answer. I started panicking.
So what did you do when you couldn't get a hold of your babysitter?
Well, immediately we tried to see if we can get an Uber service.
How did you and your husband end up getting home? Or I should say, how did you and your husband end up leaving the stadium that day?
Well, we tried to look for an Uber service, and there was no service around the stadium. So after some conversation, me and him talked, and we decided that to get home as quickly as possible, and we were both very panicked that he was okay to drive home.
Did you see any cabs around that you could have taken?
No, there were none that I saw at the time.
Was there any other way that you saw you could have gotten home?
I mean, we could have taken the public transportation, but again, we were so panicked. It would have taken over 2 hours to get home. So I know it was a mistake now, but he decided he would drive.
Ms. Schaefer, why didn't you decide to drive?
I was panicked. I was freaking out about the kids, and he was panicked, and he assured me he was okay. And so I let him drive.
So what happened after your husband started driving?
Almost within a few seconds, it was a blur, but he swerved, and before I knew it, we had barely gotten out of the parking lot, he crashed.
What happened after the crash?
I blacked out. I don't remember much. I woke up eventually, and I saw him next to me. He was passed out, bleeding. I don't remember much after that.
Ms. Schaefer, I know this must be difficult to talk about, so please let us know if you need a moment. Did you try calling 911 at any point?
I did. Once I realized he was not responding, I called 911, and that's when the ambulance came.
Did the police also come?
Yes,
Did you speak to the police at all?
I did. I don't remember much from that interaction. Again, it was all such a blur. But yes, I do remember speaking with the police.
Do you remember what you said to the police?
Not really. Again, we were just panicked. I was trying to tell them what happened. I really don't remember much.
Do you know if there was ever a police report that was created?
Yes, I believe so.
Were you able to learn what you said in that police report?
Yes, I had seen that police report, and I do now know.
And what did you learn from that police report?
I learned a little bit more about his alcohol content and some of the things that they had said about him.
Did you learn whether you had said anything to the police?
Overruled.
Yes, I do remember talking to the police, telling them what happened. Yes.
And do you remember if you told them your husband had been drinking or not?
No, I don't remember.
Ms. Schaefer, before April 8th, 2022, were you ever able to buy drinks at the Dragons games after the 7th inning?
Like I said, me and my husband had gone to these games for many date nights. I do remember they used to have a policy. We weren't allowed to buy drinks after the 7th inning.
Do you know if your husband had had anything to drink before he went to the stadium that day?
No, no.
Who sold your husband all of the drinks that he had on April 8th, 2022?
The Klein County employees.
Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. May I approach to retrieve my exhibits and pass it around for the jury to see Plaintiff's Exhibit 1?
Fine.
Thank you.
Cross-examine.
Good afternoon. Yes.
I want to start by talking about what Mr. Schaefer chose to drink that night. He had iced tea with vodka.
Yes, that's true.
He had beer.
Yes.
You said some of those were 12-ounce cans of beer,
Yes.
and some were 24-ounce cans of beer.
Yes, that's true.
On top of all of the drinks he ordered for himself, he also finished some of your drinks.
That's true. He did finish some of my drinks.
Mr. Schaefer never drank any water.
Not that I saw. I'm not sure.
Never drank any soda.
Again, not to my understanding. We had some food, but no.
Every drink he had was an alcoholic drink, right?
Yes.
On direct examination, you told us that Mr. Schaefer seemed a little intoxicated, right?
Yes, he did.
After he seemed a little intoxicated, he continued to drink alcohol.
Yes.
You said that he was slurring his words, right?
He was. Yes, he was.
After he was slurring his words, he continued to drink alcohol.
Yes, the vendors gave him more alcohol, correct?
He continued to order alcohol.
Yes, from the vendors, correct.
Your Honor, I'm publishing what's already in evidence as Exhibit 25. Ms. Schaefer, this chart shows how many drinks your husband consumed that night, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
If we add up these numbers, that's 10 drinks, right?
Yes.
10 alcoholic drinks in one game.
Yes.
10 alcoholic drinks in about 3 hours, right?
Yes.
I want to talk about whether the stadium was in a position to tell that Mr. Schaefer was intoxicated. Now, that entire game, you never saw Mr. Schaefer throw up, right?
No, I didn't.
Never saw him get into a fight with another fan.
No, just slurring and stumbling. No, no fight.
Never cursed at anyone.
No, I don't believe so, no.
He never fell asleep in his seat.
No, he didn't fall asleep.
He never even spilled his drink.
From what I saw, no.
You told us that at one point he stumbled, almost fell over, right?
Yes.
Schaefer, you don't remember any Dragons employees around, do you?
At the time, no.
So that wasn't while he was ordering drinks?
It wasn't, no. It was while we were at our seats and everyone was walking around, the vendors going up and down the aisle.
In fact, that was after he already had the 10 drinks, right?
Yes.
All those times you and Mr. Schaefer would walk to the concession stands, you never saw him wobbling, right?
No.
He was never stumbling to the concession stands?
There were some times where he had ordered drinks and I was in the bathroom or wasn't there, so I'm not too sure.
You never saw him stumbling to the concession stands, right?
Not while I was with him, no.
You never saw him leaning on the counter to hold himself up?
Not while I was with him, no.
So you didn't see it?
No.
You told us that Mr. Schaefer, he slurred his words at one point, right?
He was, yes.
Ms. Schaefer, that wasn't while he was ordering drinks, right?
No.
That wasn't while he was talking to an employee.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't in front of an employee.
From what I could see, I'm not sure, but no.
Mr. Schaefer, he was talking louder than usual at that game. You would say that, right?
Yes, he was talking loud and getting excited during the game, correct.
Ms. Schaefer, as his wife, you know what he usually sounds like, right?
I do, yes.
As far as you know, no one who was serving him drinks that night had met him before.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Overruled.
As far as you know, Ms. Schaefer, no one who had met him that night had met him before, right?
No, I don't believe anybody personally knew him.
I want to talk about Mr. Schaefer's choice to drive. Now, after the game ended, Mr. Schaefer, he stood up, right?
He did stand.
And that's when you say he almost stumbled over, right?
Yes.
Ms. Schaefer, you thought he was in no condition to drive, right?
No, I didn't. That's why we tried to find the Uber. We agreed not to drive.
You thought he was drunk.
I did.
Now, you told us that you had to get home.
Yes, we were very, very panicked. We needed to get home to the kids.
Ms. Schaefer, you had only had 3 drinks, right?
Around 3 drinks, yes.
After Mr. Schaefer had 10, he got behind the wheel, didn't he?
I know now that was a mistake, but yes, he did.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Schaefer. Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Thank you. Lawyers, I'm told maybe you're not turning on your mics, so make sure that you do. Can you remove this exhibit? Redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
Okay.
May this witness step down.
Thank you very much. You may step down. Next witness, please.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff calls Sam Corey to the stand.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name.
Sam Corey. May I have a moment to set up the courtroom?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Introduce yourself to the jury and tell them what you do for a living.
Good afternoon. My name is Sam Corey, and I work in event management and venue safety.
What's event management?
Event management is making sure that large stadiums and venues are safe in their practices.
How long have you worked in this field?
I've worked in this field since 2005, so almost 18 years.
Tell us about your educational background.
I have a bachelor's and a master's in business administration from the Illinois Institute of Technology.
Are you a member of any professional organizations?
Yes, I am. I'm part of the International Association of Venue Managers, or IAVM for short, and also I'm part of the Technique for Effective Alcohol Management, or TEAM for short.
Has your work ever been published in the area of event management and safety before?
Yes, it has. I've had multiple articles published regarding venue safety and event space safety as well.
Where do you currently work?
Currently, I am the president and the CEO of IAVM, and also I'm an instructor for the TEAM Coalition.
Have you ever been hired as an expert before?
I certainly have, 51 times.
Were all those times for the plaintiff?
Oh no, I've had a 50-50 split, so 24 times for the plaintiff, 27 and 24 times for the defense.
How much do you charge in a case like this?
Typically, for a case like this, I charge $500 an hour to prepare a report, and I also charge an additional $3,000 for my time spent in court.
Your Honor, at this time, plaintiff moves Sam Corey in as an expert in event safety and venue management.
Do you have any questions as to voir dire?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, the witness is accepted to provide expert opinion testimony in the field of expertise. Proceed.
Ms. Corey, now that we know a little bit about your background, let's talk about your work here in this case. What were you asked to do here?
In today's case, I was asked to determine whether the conduct of the Klein County Dragons Stadium was a factor in Patrick Schaefer's death on April 8th, 2022.
What materials did you review?
I reviewed all of the exhibits in today's case, the depositions by the witnesses, and I also reviewed the report prepared by Ashley Husseini.
Are those the type of materials that are regularly relied on by experts in your field?
Yes, they are.
Were you able to come to a conclusion about what happened to Patrick Schaefer?
Yes, I was.
Do you hold your conclusions to a reasonable degree of professional certainty?
Of course.
Did you prepare a report?
I did.
How long did you spend on your report?
I spent 29 hours on the report, laying out all of the evidence, looking at all the exhibits, depositions, and laying out my conclusions in today's case.
What were your conclusions?
I have two. The first one is that the alcohol sales policy that the Dragons had were unreasonable, and my second one is that the employees of the Dragons Stadium overserved Patrick Schaefer when he was visibly intoxicated.
Let's take those opinions one at a time. First, you mentioned that the defendant's sales policy was unreasonable. Before April of 2022, how late in the game could guests purchase alcohol?
Before April 2022, the industry standard to cut alcohol sales was after the 7th inning. But starting the April 2022 season, the Dragons decided to eliminate that alcohol safety cutoff and extend their alcohol sales policy through the 9th inning.
Is there a problem with serving alcohol through the 9th inning?
Yes, of course. The reason that there is some kind of alcohol stoppage point is to allow guests enough time to sober up. If you're allowing guests time to drink that late in the game, many of them are going to be driving home. It's simply not a safe practice.
What about other stadiums? Do they serve alcohol past the 7th inning?
No, it's almost unheard of. Of the 232 baseball stadiums, the Dragons are the only stadium that serve alcohol through the 9th inning.
Your Honor, objection. May I be heard?
Let's go to sidebar. Yes.
We believe that the witness's answer just opened the door to what we talked about in motions. The witness was speaking in the present tense, saying that no other stadiums have an alcohol cutoff past the 7th inning. This is exactly what we argued about in motions, and we would like Your Honor to rule on it again to see if I can cross-examine on that.
Counsel?
Your Honor, we stipulated to not mentioning the fact that the defense had changed their policy after Mr. Schaefer had passed away. This witness is merely opining to the fact that at the time of Mr. Schaefer's death, there were almost no stadiums that were serving alcohol through the 9th inning.
May I respond?
If you feel you need to.
Then no, Your Honor.
The witness said that it's almost unheard of that stadiums serve after the 7th inning. That opens the door to questions about whether or not he's heard of it. You may proceed.
What about stadiums in other sports?
Stadiums in other sports like basketball, hockey, again, there is always some kind of alcohol stoppage point. The Dragons are the only stadium that serves alcohol through the 9th inning.
Are there any guidelines that tell stadiums when to stop serving alcohol?
Yes, of course.
Where do these guidelines come from?
These guidelines are written in the team coalition guidelines, and those are the industry standards.
Earlier, you mentioned that you were an instructor for TEAM. What exactly is TEAM?
TEAM is basically a coalition that consists of various sports organizations and large sporting industries that come together to promote and educate the industry when it comes to safe practices in alcohol sales and also venue safety.
Does TEAM suggest when baseball stadiums should stop serving alcohol?
Yes, TEAM suggests that alcohol sales stoppages should be after the 7th inning.
Based on your professional experience, If a stadium were to change their alcohol sales policy, what would you recommend they do?
Usually, if a stadium decides to create a new policy or change an older policy, it's industry standard to conduct research before doing so.
Based on your review of this case here, was there anything that showed that the defendant did this type of research?
Unfortunately, not. After my review of all of the evidence in today's case, the business stadium operation, Alex Brin, suggested this idea to the president and CEO of the Dragon Stadium, and that idea was approved in just 8 minutes. There was no research done regarding this change in policy.
Ms. Corey, let's talk about your opinion on Mr. Schaefer being overserved that night. What did you review to come to this opinion?
I reviewed the toxicology report prepared by Brett Baines, and I also reviewed the deposition of Sidney Schaefer.
Based on your review of those materials, were you able to find out how many drinks Mr. Schaefer consumed that night?
Yes, I was.
Based on your review, were you able to find out how many drinks Mr. Schaefer consumed in each inning of the game?
Yes, I was.
Did you prepare a chart showing how many drinks Mr. Schaefer drank in each inning of the game?
I did.
Would using that chart help explain your testimony to the jury today?
It would, yes.
Your Honor, may I publish an exact enlargement of Exhibit 25, which has already been admitted into evidence?
Yeah, sure.
And may this witness step down and make use of the demonstrative?
Sure.
Ms. Corey, what are we looking at here?
So this is a chart that I prepared, which lays out the number of drinks Patrick Schaefer consumed the evening of April 8, 2022.
Earlier, you mentioned the industry standard cutoff for stopping sales for alcohol. Can you please show us on this chart where that cutoff would have been?
Yes, the industry standard cutoff for alcohol sales was after the 7th inning, so it would be right here.
And Ms. Corey, what are those numbers at the top there of that chart?
So these numbers in white on the top, these represent the number of innings in a baseball game. Typically in a baseball game, there are 9 innings.
And what are those red numbers in the boxes there?
So these red numbers indicate the number of drinks Patrick Schaefer consumed in each of these innings.
How many drinks did Mr. Schaefer have before the industry cutoff?
So before the industry standard cutoff, if we add up all these drinks, Patrick Schaefer consumed 5.5 alcoholic drinks.
According to your review of the evidence, was there any signs that show that Mr. Schaefer was showing signs of intoxication during the game?
Yes, there were. After I reviewed the toxicology report, as well as Sidney Schaefer's deposition, I was made aware that Patrick Schaefer was showing signs of visible intoxication, like slurring his speech and acting a bit tipsy around the 8th inning.
According to Sidney Schaefer, when did Mr. Schaefer start showing these signs?
According to Sidney Schaefer, Patrick Schaefer started to show these signs around the top of the 8th inning.
Now, Mr. Schaefer purchased more drinks after the industry cutoff. How many more drinks did Mr. Schaefer purchase?
4.5 drinks after the industry standard cutoff.
Ms. Corey, were those drinks purchased before or after the industry standard cutoff?
They were purchased after the industry standard cutoff.
Ms. Corey, were those drinks purchased before or after Mr. Schaefer started showing visible signs of intoxication?
They were purchased after Patrick Schaefer was showing visible signs of intoxication.
Thank you, Ms. Corey. You may take your seat. No further questions at this time, Your Honor. May I take down the demonstrative?
Do you want to use the demonstrative?
Yes. Oh, sorry, yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may cross-examine whenever.
Good afternoon, Ms. Corey.
Good afternoon.
Let's start by talking about whether the Dragons needed a cutoff. A moment ago, you said that the team's coalition guidelines suggest a 7th inning cutoff. Isn't that right?
Right, they suggest a 7th inning cutoff, and almost every team follows those guidelines.
That's a suggestion, right?
Correct.
It's not a rule, is it?
No, it's the industry standard.
There's no law requiring a seventh inning cutoff, right?
No law, no.
You said a moment ago on direct examination that selling alcohol past the seventh inning is almost unheard of. Those were your words, right?
Correct.
Ma'am, you've heard of 6 other teams that sell alcohol past the seventh inning. Isn't that true?
Yes, those 6 other teams, they started in 2023, and they don't sell through the 9th inning. They stop their alcohol sales at the 8th inning.
They sell past the seventh inning, don't they?
Yes, they do.
The Houston Astros sell alcohol past the seventh inning, don't they?
Correct, the Houston Astros, and I think the Rockets, if I'm not mistaken, as well.
The Arizona Diamondbacks sell alcohol past the seventh inning.
Yes,
So do the Minnesota Twins.
yes.
The Baltimore Orioles have been selling alcohol past the seventh inning for 30 years, haven't they?
They have, but again, all of these teams, again, they have an alcohol stoppage point that comes to the 8th inning, and that's important because it allows at least 1 inning for guests to sober up.
Ma'am, I'm not asking about all of these other teams. I'm just asking about the Baltimore Orioles. They've been selling alcohol past the seventh inning for over 30 years, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Every year, millions of fans go to Camden Yards, don't they?
I'm assuming so, yes.
You can assume that millions of fans drive home, right?
Yes,
You researched how many DUIs came from Camden Yards, right?
yes,
You found 17 incidents, didn't you?
that is correct.
17 incidents out of millions of fans, right, ma'am?
Right, those 17 incidents were DUIs, and again, at the 8th inning with those 17 incidents, we can only imagine how many more could happen if those alcohol sales were extended through the end of the game.
That's 17 incidents in 30 years, isn't it?
That is true.
That's less than 1 DUI per year. Isn't that true?
Yes,
You can't tell us if that's more than stadiums that do have that seventh inning cutoff, can you?
no, I cannot.
You can't tell us if that's less than stadiums that have a seventh inning cutoff, can you?
No.
So let's talk about whether it was reasonable for the Dragons to change their alcohol policy. They had 12 games without an alcohol cutoff, right?
They had 12 games without an alcohol cutoff, correct.
About 4,300 fans attended each game.
Approximately.
4,300 times 12, that's about 51,000 fans who went to the stadium without that alcohol cutoff, right?
Assuming your math is correct, yes.
Out of those 51,000 fans, there was one alcohol-related car crash. Isn't that right?
That I've heard.
Overruled.
Based on my review of this evidence, yes, but as far as I'm aware, I'm not too sure.
Well, ma'am, I'm just asking about what you're aware of. You're only aware of one accident out of 51,000 fans. Isn't that true?
Luckily, yes, just one, I guess. Thankfully, no more.
Let's talk about whether the Dragons should have served Patrick Schaefer alcohol. A moment ago on direct examination, you told us that Patrick Schaefer was visibly intoxicated, right?
Correct.
That he shouldn't have been served, right?
Yes,
You said he was stumbling,
that is true.
slurring his words.
Yes.
All of the employees who served Patrick Schaefer were deposed, right?
Yes, they were deposed about 4 months later.
They were deposed.
Yes, 4 months later.
None of the employees who served Patrick Schaefer remember him stumbling, right?
After 4 months, I know.
Well, ma'am, I'm not asking you why you think they don't remember. I'm just asking you if they don't remember. They don't remember him stumbling, right?
Correct?
Or slurring his words.
Correct.
None of the employees who served Patrick Schaefer remembered him acting drunk, right?
When they were deposed and asked about it, that's correct.
There were 38 other people who were sitting around Patrick Schaefer in the stands, right?
Yes, there were.
All of those 38 people were asked about Patrick Schaefer, right?
Yes, they were asked 2 months later.
None of those 38 other people remembered Patrick Schaefer stumbling, right?
Correct.
None of them remembered Patrick Schaefer acting drunk, right?
True.
The only person in your review that says that Patrick Schaefer looked drunk is his wife, right?
Well, I based my review on the wife's deposition as well as the toxicology report prepared by Brett Baines.
I'm just asking about the only person who says that he looked drunk. The toxicologist wasn't at the baseball game, was he?
No,
The only person that says that Patrick Schaefer looked drunk at the game was his wife.
yes,
Ma'am, that's the woman who brought this lawsuit.
yes.
Let's talk about personal responsibility. You listed all your conclusions in your report, didn't you?
Yes,
You blame the Dragons for what happened to Patrick Schaefer, don't you?
correct.
You only blame the Dragons, right?
Well, it's my opinion in today's case that the Dragons served Patrick Schaefer when he was visibly intoxicated and that their alcohol sales policy was unreasonable.
Exactly, ma'am. So the only party you blame is the Dragons.
That is my opinion in today's case, yes.
The phrase personal responsibility, that's not in your report, is it?
No,
Permission to publish what's already in evidence as Exhibit 25? It's right here.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Like you said just a moment ago, it's your conclusion that Patrick Schaefer shouldn't have been served all of the drinks on this chart, right?
correct.
Ma'am, Patrick Schaefer ordered all of these drinks, didn't he?
Some were ordered by his wife, if I'm not mistaken, but nevertheless, he did consume those drinks, yes.
Nevertheless, he consumed every single drink on this chart, right?
Yes, that was served by the defendant's employees.
You mentioned the toxicology report a moment ago. You reviewed that, right?
I did.
So you know that in the 9th inning, Patrick Schaefer's blood alcohol content was 0.15, right?
That is true.
You know from your review of the toxicology report that someone with a BAC that high knows they're drunk, right?
Exactly. Not only do they know that they're drunk, but based on my review of the toxicology report, an overwhelming majority of people show visible signs of intoxication at that blood alcohol content.
Right, ma'am. So not only did Patrick Schaefer know that he was drunk, he drank 2.5 drinks in the 9th, right?
Yes, after the defendant's employees sold him those drinks.
Patrick Schaefer chose to drink 10 drinks that night, didn't he?
Yes,
After he drank 10 drinks, he chose to drive, didn't he?
yes.
Thank you, Ms. Corey. I have nothing further.
Thank you. Is there any redirect? Just leave that
Okay,
in case they use it. Just leave it wherever it is.
understood.
Ms. Corey, you just mentioned about baseball stadiums who sell alcohol through the 8th inning. How many incidents did those stadiums have? Or did the one stadium have that we're talking about on cross?
17 incidents.
Ms. Corey, how many stadiums serve alcohol through the 9th inning?
None.
No further questions, Your Honor. May this witness be excused?
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down. Thank you.
Your Honor.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff asked to read in portions of the toxicology report, Exhibit 3, which is already admitted into evidence.
Yes, you may read it in.
Reporting counsel to Part 8 in the exhibit,
What exhibit number is it?
Exhibit number 3.
Thank you.
The overwhelming majority of people with a 0.15 BAC or higher will show external signs of intoxication, such as slurred, loud speech, lack of coordination, balance, aggressive behavior, and or moving slowly, delaying reaction. People with a higher tolerance for alcohol may not show these signs at a BAC of 0.15. Some will show these signs at a BAC less than 0.15. Some signs as low as 0.15. Reading number 11. His BAC at 7:58 p.m. and 8:39 p.m. were at least 0.15 at least 0.15 respectively. Reading number 10. If you stop drinking after consuming a 24-ounce Coors Light in the 5th inning, his BAC would have been 0.0775 at the time of the accident, which is below the legal limit in Pennsylvania, 0.08, and not enough to cause meaningful impairment to driving.
Thank you. Anything further from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor. At this time, we rest.
Fine. Somebody can move this chart out of the way. Is the defense ready to proceed? I'm sorry, wait.
Your Honor, at this time, we would request a brief 5-minute recess and a time check from the bailiffs.
I can give you that time check. So the plaintiff has used just under 29 minutes, and the defense has used just under 23 minutes.
Do you need a recess?
Yes, Your Honor, maybe we take
Let's,
take a brief recess.
in a moment, yes.
The defense does have a motion, Your Honor.
I'll hear it.
We move for judgment as a matter of law under Rule 50 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. Has met their burden, it's not enough to show that Patrick Schaefer died because of alcohol. They have to show that the stadium served him improperly. Now, it's undisputed that Patrick Schaefer was drinking alcohol before the 7th inning, and they failed to show that the alcohol he had already consumed before the 7th inning would not have been enough to cause him to crash the car that night. Because they failed to prove this, we move for judgment as a matter of law.
Thank you. Thank you. Motion is denied, and we will take a 5-minute recess.
Testing. Testing, testing, testing. No? Testing, testing. This is on? Great.
Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to proceed?
Yes,
I
Your Honor.
think we're up to the defense witnesses, and I assume somebody put this up for a reason. So call your first witness.
We call Alex Britton to the stand. Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, my name is Alex Britton.
What do you do for a living?
I'm currently the president of business operations for the Klein County Dragons.
What do you do as the president of business operations?
I oversee a whole bunch of things. That includes finance, legal, marketing, broadcasting, sales as well.
Does your job include overseeing alcohol sales?
Yes, I oversee concession sales. That includes alcohol.
Sir, have you been in court today?
I have, yes.
Is it true that your stadium sold Patrick Schaefer 10 drinks?
That's true, yes.
Why would your stadium sell a customer that many drinks?
Well, there's two reasons. First, we expect that all adults who consume alcohol at our stadium are going to be behaving responsibly, and because we have several safety protocols in place as well.
Let's talk about the safety protocols that you have in place. Your Honor, I'm publishing for the members of the jury what's already in evidence as Exhibit 7. I'm approaching the witness with a copy. Mr. Britton, what have I handed you?
This is our safety protocol for serving alcohol.
Were these safety protocols in place in 2022?
Yes, they were.
Who gets these safety protocols?
All employees that deal concessions.
How many safety protocols are on this slide?
There are 5.
How many of your protocols are bolded, red, and underlined?
Just one of them.
Could you read that protocol to the members of the jury?
Yes. The bolded, underlined, and in red protocol states, do not sell alcohol to any person who appears inebriated.
Why do you tell your employees to not sell alcohol to anyone who appears inebriated?
For safety purposes.
Why do you go on to say slurring, talking loudly, stumbling, use your common sense?
We do that to inform our employees for which signs they should look out for.
How many of your employees are trained on alcohol safety?
Every single one of them.
You can put that down, sir. Let's talk about whether your employees followed your safety policies. Did you investigate which one of your employees saw Patrick Schaefer?
Yes, once we learned what had happened, we did launch an internal investigation.
What did that internal investigation look like?
Well, we've reviewed different documents. That includes video surveillance footage and also interviewing several employees who were working that day.
Your Honor, I'm going to read a stipulation to the jury. Stipulation 5. Peter Gaynor, Deeksha Walia, Emily Grubb, and Tim Rock were deposed in August 2022. None recall seeing Patrick Schaefer on April 8th, 2022. Mr. Britton, do you recognize the names that I just listed?
Yes, those are the employees who did concessions.
Are those the employees that you spoke to?
Yes.
What did those employees tell you?
They told me that they didn't see Patrick Schaefer slurring or stumbling.
Let's talk about your policy on when to serve customers alcohol. Before 2022, when did you serve your customers alcohol?
Prior to that, we served it through the 7th inning,
When did that policy change?
in November of 2021.
What did it change to?
We extended the sales of all concessions through the 9th inning.
Why did you extend the sales of all concessions through the 9th inning of the game?
We did so to increase revenue for the team.
You said you did so to increase revenue. Why did you need to increase revenue?
Well, as a minor league baseball team, we didn't have big sponsorships or advertisement deals to bring in money consistently. So, especially considering the loss of no games during the COVID seasons, we had to find ways to recoup some of that money.
When you extended your cutoff through the 9th inning for money, were you concerned about how that would affect the safety of your fans?
No, we were not.
Why not?
Well, first, we expect that all adults that consume alcohol on our premises do so responsibly. And it's also because we still had those same safety policies in place.
You mentioned those safety policies. Let's talk about whether your safety policies were the problem. How many games did your stadium have without your usual alcohol cutoff?
There were 12 games.
What was the total attendance of those 12 games?
Roughly 51,000.
Out of the 51,000 fans that attended your stadium without the cutoff, how many reports did you get of an alcohol-related crash?
Just one.
Thank you, Mr. Britton. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examine?
Yes, Your Honor. May I have a moment to set up the court?
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Britton, like you said on direct, the Dragons didn't have apologies, one moment. There we go. Like you said on direct, the Dragons, they didn't have a season in 2020, correct?
You're correct.
And that hurt your business.
Absolutely.
You lost millions of dollars.
Yes.
And then in 2021, the league implemented a rule that shortened games.
Yes, what they did among many steps was shorten the amount of times pitchers had between throwing the ball.
And that also hurt your business.
That did, yes.
You continued losing millions of dollars.
Yes, we were.
So it was your job to find a solution to make up all that money.
Yes, as the president of business operations, that fell upon me.
And it had to be fast,
Yes.
because your boss was pressuring you.
My boss asked me to find a solution. Yes.
Well, your boss actually told you that if you didn't find this solution, he'd find someone else who could.
That's what Mr. Bernstein had said. Yes.
Now, you had a few options for how to make up this money.
Yes, I explored different avenues.
Well, you could have increased merchandise prices.
Yes, but that's not what we did.
Right, you didn't increase the price of food
No, we didn't do that.
because you thought that this would cause fans not to come to your games and spend their money.
Exactly. We still wanted to make it reasonable for fans to come to our games.
You could have just increased the price of alcohol,
We could have done so, yes.
but you didn't do that either.
You're correct for the same reasons.
Well, you didn't increase the price of alcohol because you wanted fans to buy more alcohol, not less.
Yes, we thought increasing the prices might deter them. You're correct.
So you decided to eliminate your alcohol safety cutoff.
We decided to extend sales, yes.
That's right, from the 7th inning all the way to the 9th inning.
You're correct.
But you knew that one of the reasons that that 7th inning cutoff was in place was to prevent fans from drinking right before driving home.
Yes, that was one of our concerns.
But when you eliminated that policy, it was no longer a concern.
Well, that's not necessarily true. We had faith in the remaining policies that we had in place, and we also expected that all of the adults consuming alcohol would be doing so responsibly.
That's right. You said that it was not your job to make sure people are acting like big boys, right?
That's what I said, yes.
Because it's your job to increase revenue.
That is my role, yes.
Now, there were things that you could have suggested to your boss that might have prevented fans from driving home drunk.
Sure.
Right, you could have suggested Uber stations,
Yes.
Lyft stations.
Yes, but again, that wasn't in my duties as the president of business operations, so I was focused on increasing revenue for the program.
It wasn't your job to keep people safe.
That's not what I said.
Well, you said it wasn't your job to suggest things that might prevent people from driving home drunk.
Well, sure, it was my job to increase the revenue, and since we had several policies in place that we were training the employees to make sure they were following, I was focusing on the revenue.
You were focusing on revenue, you were not focusing on safety.
That wasn't my job, so no.
Now, you suggested this policy change in an email to your boss.
That's true.
Your Honor, permission to publish what's already been admitted into evidence as Exhibit 19.
Okay.
This is the email where you first suggested that policy change to your boss.
Yes, you're correct.
Now, you sent this email at 1:56 p.m.
Yes,
Your boss replied at 2:04 p.m.,
yes,
8 minutes later.
yes, you're correct.
And in those 8 minutes, he never asked you if you looked into whether other stadiums sold through the ninth inning,
No, he didn't reach out aside from this email.
right? He didn't reach out to ask you if you'd done any research into whether this was safe.
No, that wasn't my job.
That's right. He didn't ask you any questions at all.
He did not ask me any questions about my suggestion. No,
He just said, approved.
you're correct.
Now, this policy went into place April 4th, 2022.
Yes, that was the first game we had.
That's right, and Patrick Schaefer died April 8th, 2022.
Yes, unfortunately, he passed away later that week.
Just 4 days into this new policy.
You're correct, yes.
And you sent this email on November 22nd, 2021.
Yes, just after the season had ended and prior to the season for 2022.
5 months prior to the season of 2022, correct?
Yes,
And in those 5 months, you didn't do any additional research
no, I did not.
because according to you, research wasn't necessary.
Well, yeah, it wasn't really my job, and yes.
Now, on direct, you were asked about whether you spoke to your employees about whether they saw Patrick displaying signs that he was drunk.
Yes, that was part of the internal investigation we conducted.
Right, you deposed them 4 months after he died.
Yes, that's what we did.
So you waited 4 months after Patrick Schaefer died to ask your employees if they remember a fan from 4 months ago.
Yes, it was, yes.
And in those 4 months, those employees saw thousands of fans.
I'm sure they might have, yes.
You also said here, I bet we'll make more money than any other stadium.
That's what I wrote in the email, yes.
You also wrote in the email, no downside.
I wrote that, yes.
Mr. Britton, you knew what one of those downsides could be, right?
I'm not sure I'm following.
Well, you knew that one of the downsides of getting rid of this policy was drunk driving.
Well, I thought that could have been a concern, but since I had confidence in our safety policies that were still in place, it wasn't a primary concern.
It wasn't a primary concern that fans were going to drink and drive by getting rid of this policy?
Well, no, because we had trained our employees to do what they were supposed to, and we also had an expectation for the consumers of the alcohol to behave responsibly.
Nevertheless, you know that the downside of getting rid of this policy, as you just said, was drunk driving.
That was a possibility.
And that you know drunk driving leads to death.
Yes, that's an unfortunate consequence.
So it's an unfortunate consequence or an unfortunate downside of this policy getting rid of was death.
Well, I suppose so. Again, we expect all of our patrons to consume alcohol responsibly. Fortunately, we can't do much aside from training our employees and having that expectation.
So that's a yes to my question. The downside could be death.
It was a possibility, yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Is there any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Britton, when you extended the safety cutoff to the 9th inning in this email, was there still a policy in place to cut off a fan who had too much to drink?
Absolutely. That policy did not change when we extended the concession sales.
What about if that fan was too drunk in the 8th or the 9th innings? Could you have still cut that fan off?
Absolutely.
Was this a way that your stadium could still prevent drunk driving?
Yes, that was one of just many protocols we had to try to keep everyone safe.
Thank you, Mr. Britton. I have nothing further.
Thank you. Next defense witness.
Yes, Your Honor, we call Ashley Husseini to the stand. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good afternoon. My name is Ashley Husseini.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a professor at Loyola Marymount University.
What do you teach?
I teach a course called Venue Management. It's about how to run venues like concerts or stadiums safely, profitably, and legally.
Professor, how are you involved in this case?
I was asked to review the Dragons' alcohol policies and determine if they were safe.
Before we talk about your conclusions, I want the jury to get a sense of your qualifications. What degrees do you have?
I received my bachelor's in recreation management from San Jose State University before going on to get my master's from Loyola Marymount.
Can you tell us about your professional experience in venue management?
Certainly. For a number of years, I managed a minor league baseball stadium before moving on to be the manager of the Red Rocks Amphitheater and the Walt Disney Concert Hall.
How many years of experience do you have in venue management?
19.
You told us that you were here to review the Dragons' alcohol policy. Are you familiar with the venue industry standards for alcohol safety?
Yes, of course, I helped design them.
How?
For 2 years, I helped chair a coalition called Techniques for Effective Alcohol Management. We had representatives from every major sports league in the country: the NFL, the NBA, NHL, MLB, MLS, NASCAR, even the NCAA.
Have you ever spoken at an industry conference about alcohol safety?
Yes, I have. Earlier this year, in fact. I was invited by the International Association of Venue Managers to be their keynote speaker on best practices for serving alcohol.
Are you published in alcohol safety?
Yes, I am.
Professor, have you been engaged as an expert before in court cases involving venues?
Yes, I have, 67 times.
I want to be upfront with the jury. Who hired you in those cases?
I've always been hired by the defense, by the venues.
Have you ever been retained by the Dragons before?
Yes, I have, twice before.
Let's talk about how you formed your conclusions. What information did you have?
Well, I had access to all the stipulations, witness statements, and exhibits for today's case, and I reviewed them all thoroughly.
What methods did you use to analyze the Dragons' alcohol policy?
Well, I analyzed two aspects of the Dragons' alcohol policy. First, who they serve alcohol, and second, when they serve them alcohol. I then compared those two aspects of the Dragons' policy to the known research in the field and the industry standards.
Were you able to reach a conclusion to a reasonable degree of certainty in your field?
Yes, I was.
Your Honor, we tender Ashley Husseini as an expert in venue management and alcohol safety.
Are there any questions as to qualifications? No objection, Your Honor. The witness is qualified to provide expert opinion testimony in his fields of expertise. Proceed.
Professor, tell the jury, what did you conclude?
Well, those two aspects of the Dragons' policy I just mentioned, they were reasonable.
I want to break that down, starting with that first aspect you mentioned, who gets served. What's the Dragons' policy there?
Well, obviously, they don't serve to minors, and they won't serve anyone who appears visibly intoxicated.
How is an employee supposed to know if a fan is intoxicated?
Well, because they're trained to do so. The Dragons train their employees the signs to look for to see that someone's intoxicated and are instructed not to serve those people.
Well then, Professor, I want to push back for a second. If the Dragons' alcohol policy was safe, how did they miss the fact that Patrick Schaefer was intoxicated that night?
Because there's no evidence that Mr. Schaefer was showing signs of visible intoxication.
What's visible intoxication?
Visible intoxication is just that. It's intoxication that we can see or perceive that someone is under the effects of alcohol.
Can you give us some examples?
Certainly. Some classic signs include slurring one's speech, being off balance or unsteady on your feet, bloodshot eyes, those sorts of things.
Why do you say there's no evidence that Patrick Schaefer was visibly intoxicated?
Because every single person in Mr. Schaefer's section of the stadium was interviewed. Every single fan, every single usher, every single vendor, none of them remembered seeing Patrick Schaefer look visibly intoxicated. In fact, none of them remembered seeing Mr. Schaefer at all.
Professor, were you here when Sydney Schaefer was testifying?
Yes, I was.
Do you remember her saying that Patrick Schaefer stumbled at one point and looked drunk?
Yes, I heard her describe that incident.
Why didn't that lead you to believe that Patrick Schaefer was visibly intoxicated?
Because the key question is whether Mr. Schaefer looked visibly intoxicated before he was served alcohol. That incident of stumbling, the first time Ms. Schaefer describes her husband as looking drunk, that was at the end of the game, long after he'd been served his final drinks.
Let's talk about that second aspect you mentioned. What's the industry standard for when a stadium should stop selling their fans drinks?
The industry standard is to cut off alcohol sales at the end of the 7th inning for baseball.
So then why was it reasonable for the Dragons to keep selling alcohol past the 7th inning?
Because there's no research that shows having a 7th inning cutoff actually makes things any safer.
What do you mean there's no research?
I've been in this field nearly 2 decades. I've read the literature. I've helped write some of the literature. And there's no research studies, no articles that describe any correlation whatsoever between stadiums having alcohol cutoffs and reducing drunk driving accidents.
Professor, based on everything you reviewed, what was the alcohol-related accident rate when the Dragons removed that 7th inning cutoff?
After removing that cutoff, the Dragons held 12 games. In total, 51,000 fans attended those 12 games. There was one alcohol-related accident. That's 1 in 51,000, or an accident rate of 0.00002.
Thank you, Professor. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Cross-examine?
I have a moment.
Surely.
May I proceed? Mr. Husseini, you just testified on behalf of the defendant, the Dragons.
That's correct.
This isn't the first time that you've testified for a defendant.
No, it is not.
In fact, you've only ever testified for defendants.
That's correct.
You've never testified for a plaintiff.
That's correct.
You're here giving your opinion on the Dragons' policies, correct?
Yes.
At their stadium?
Yes.
But you don't have any recent experience working with stadiums.
What do you mean recent?
You don't currently work for a stadium?
No, I do not. I'm a professor.
In fact, you haven't worked for a stadium in over 10 years.
That's true.
The defendant is the one that's paying you.
Yes, they're paying my rate.
They're paying you for your opinion here.
They're paying me for my time.
Well, you're here giving your opinion, yes?
Yes, I am.
And you're being paid for your time, yes.
That's correct.
You're being paid $750 an hour,
That's my rate.
plus $10,000 to testify here in court.
That's true.
So by the end of the day, you would have paid the defendant over $20,000.
For today's case, yes.
So let's talk about your opinion. Let's talk about your opinions on the Dragons training policy. We'd agree that it's important for stadium employees to be well trained
Of course.
so that they can keep their guests safe.
Yes.
And it's not safe to overserve a guest.
No, it is not.
That's why those employees must be trained to detect intoxication.
That's true.
Your Honor, permission to publish Exhibit 7, which is already in evidence.
Sure.
The Dragons provide a 1-hour training for their employees.
Yes, for alcohol serving employees.
In that 1-hour training, they see this one slide.
Yes, that's one aspect of the training.
They have one question and answer session
Yes, that's correct.
and a chance to follow a more experienced employee.
For a month, yes.
But that more experienced employee also saw this one slide, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And only had 1 hour of training.
Yes, on alcohol training, yes.
There's no expert that comes in that talks to employees about signs of intoxication.
No.
There's no training manual for them to study.
No manual.
There's not even a video for them to look at to see what an intoxicated person looks like.
No, there's not.
Despite that, you think that this training is adequate?
Yes, it is.
In fact, in your own words, this training goes above and beyond.
Absolutely. It describes all of the classic signs of someone being visibly intoxicated.
Let's talk about your second opinion, about who saw Mr. Schaefer that night. It's your opinion that no one saw Mr. Schaefer that night intoxicated,
No one remembers seeing him intoxicated. That's right.
in part because interactions between guests and stadium employees are short,
Generally, yes.
which is already in evidence. May I approach?
Thank you.
You were here when Sidney Schaefer was testifying, yes?
I was.
So you're aware that Mr. Schaefer was sitting in the aisle seat there,
Yes, I'm aware.
and that there were 38 people in that section,
That's true.
and that the employee that was serving that section went up and down those stairs the entire night
Yes, selling alcohol.
for 3.5 hours.
Yes, that's right.
And that employee that was selling alcohol sold to Mr. Schaefer multiple times.
From my understanding, yes.
He even appeared to recognize Mr. Schaefer.
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for speculation.
Overruled. You may answer.
I'm not sure what you mean, recognized.
He appeared to recognize Mr. Schaefer.
The witness doesn't understand what you mean by that question.
He approached Mr. Schaefer after selling him a few drinks and said, "You again."
Yes, that's true.
And you read the toxicology report.
Of course.
So you're aware that when that employee served Mr. Schaefer his last drinks, his blood alcohol content was at minimum a 0.15.
That's the estimate, yes.
You're also aware that the overwhelming majority of people at a 0.15 show visible signs of intoxication.
That's true.
Signs like slurring,
Yes.
stumbling,
That is a classic sign.
and talking loudly.
Yes, that could be one.
The same signs that Sidney Schaefer said that Mr. Schaefer was showing before he was sold his last drinks.
I don't agree with that.
You were in this courtroom when Sidney Schaefer testified, correct?
Yes, I was.
She told us that Mr. Schaefer was slurring his speech,
Yes.
stumbling,
Yes, but not before he was served.
She told us that he was slurring during the 8th inning.
She mentioned an incident where he slurred his speech. That's right.
During the 8th inning.
That's true.
Before he was sold drinks in the 9th inning.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's before he was sold his last drinks. Yes.
The one incident was before, yes.
Let's talk about your opinion on the Dragons' policy. You're familiar with stadium policy.
Of course.
Standards in the industry.
Yes.
So you're aware that the overwhelming majority of stadiums stop serving alcohol in the seventh inning.
That's correct. It's the industry standard.
In fact, that industry standard comes from the Teams Coalition,
That's true.
the same coalition that you used to be the chair of, correct?
That's right.
So you helped come up with some of these standards.
I did.
So you helped suggest before that the seventh inning cutoff was reasonable.
Yes, it was what we thought should be the industry standard.
But today you're saying that the seventh inning cutoff is no longer reasonable?
That's right, because we've come to understand there's no research to support such a cutoff.
The Dragons is the only stadium that serves alcohol through the ninth inning.
That's true.
And no stadium, well, a few stadiums serve alcohol through the eighth inning.
That's right.
So there's no data because the Dragons are the only ones that are doing this.
That's true, but there are other venues that exist without alcohol cutoffs, and there's data about them.
But we're talking about baseball stadiums, correct?
They are a type of venue. That's true.
So if the Dragons extend alcohol through the ninth inning, that's right before their guests are about to go home, right?
Yes.
Get in their cars
Yes, if they drove.
and possibly get into accidents.
Yes.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Thank you. Is there any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Professor, on cross-examination, you were asked about a toxicology report. Does this toxicology report say that everyone with a 0.15 BAC shows all these signs of visible intoxication?
No, it does not say that.
Does this toxicology report say that Patrick Schaefer showed all of those signs of visible intoxication?
No, it's merely an estimate.
Does it say that the Dragons employees saw those signs of visible intoxication?
No, the report does not say that.
Oh, counsel also asked you about the Dragons violating the industry standard. Professor, are there any other professional baseball stadiums that sell alcohol past the seventh inning?
Yes, I'm aware of 6 other stadiums that sell past the 7th inning.
And is there any research that they have more alcohol-related accidents than stadiums who cut off in the seventh inning?
No, there's no research that suggests any correlation like that.
Thank you, Professor. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. Is there any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down. I think we're up to closing arguments.
Yes, Your Honor, the defense rests. May we have a break before closing arguments?
We'll take a brief break before closing arguments. Thank you.
And may we get a time check from the bailiff?
Absolutely. So the plaintiff has 16 minutes, and the defense has, do some mental math here, 22 minutes.
And can we confirm how long, are we taking a 5-minute break? I just want to confirm with the judge. This is a 5-minute break.
Is a 5-minute break adequate?
More than adequate, Your Honor.
5-minute break.
After closings are done, you fill out your ballot. Yeah. You submit it. Yeah. Everyone's going to say what their favorite moment in the trial was, and then I'll announce the winner. And then what? Then I'll announce the winner.
Favorite moment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, whatever time is left, which won't be much.
Serve up?
No, just plain rebuttal.
Okay. Are we ready to resume, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
Someone has to remove this unless it's going to be used, but it is going to be used.
Yes, Your Honor.
Whenever you're ready. Thank you. Please be seated.
No downside. That's what the defendant's employee wrote in this email to his boss. An email recommending that the defendant extend their alcohol safety policy from the 7th inning through the 9th inning, right before their fans will be getting in their cars to drive home. An email that clearly stated the reason for this new policy: recouping profits. We may make more money than we did when the games were longer. An email that was so concerned about the profits that they failed to consider the losses, real losses. Because members of the jury, the defendant was wrong about their new policy. There was a downside. The downside to that policy was death. Today, the issue for you to decide is whether the defendant should be held responsible for the death they caused. As the judge will instruct you, as the plaintiff, we have the burden today of showing you that it's just more likely than not that the defendant's decision to eliminate their alcohol safety policy and the selling of alcohol to Mr. Schaefer when he was visibly intoxicated were substantial factors in causing his death. And today, we've met that burden because we've been able to prove two things. First, that the defendant overserved Mr. Schaefer on the night of April 8th. And second, that the defendant's decision to eliminate their alcohol safety cutoff was a cause of Mr. Schaefer's death. So let's take a look at that first point. That the defendant's decision to overserve Mr. Schaefer caused his death. Today, we heard a lot about what Mr. Schaefer was drinking and how much he had been drinking from his wife, Sydney Schaefer. And as difficult as it must have been for her to talk about that night, she didn't sugarcoat anything. She got up on this witness stand, she looked you in the eye, and she told you that both she and her husband had been drinking that night. And Patrick Schaefer drank a lot that night. As a rare date night for the two of them, they enjoyed having a few drinks at the game. But for Patrick Schaefer, it was more than a few. You also heard from Sam Corey, an expert with over 15 years of experience working with stadiums, including the management of servers. Sam Corey got up here and she told you that the defendant overserved Mr. Schaefer when he was visibly intoxicated. She showed you this chart. Showing the number of drinks Mr. Schaefer had in each inning of the game. She told you that despite having a stated policy not to overserve guests, that when Mr. Schaefer was served these drinks in the 8th and 9th innings, he was already visibly intoxicated. And we know that he was already intoxicated because Sydney Schaefer got on the stand and she told us that at that time, Mr. Schaefer was already looking tipsy. He was slurring his words and stumbling, so much so that he almost fell. But we don't just need to just rely on Sydney Schaefer's testimony. Because based on that toxicology report that both parties agreed to admit, we know that Mr. Schaefer's blood alcohol content at the 8th inning was at minimum a 0.10. And then by the 9th inning, a 0.15. That same report told us that the overwhelming majority of people show visible signs of intoxication at a 0.15. Members of the jury, if that's not more likely than not, then what is? Alex Britton tried to tell us that none of their employees saw Mr. Schaefer intoxicated that night. But that's not all that surprising, is it? Because when we looked at their training slide, do you remember what it consisted of? Just this. One slide off of one PowerPoint in a 1-hour training and one question and answer session. Oh, and a chance to follow a more experienced employee who had the same training. Members of the jury, the defendant sold Patrick Schaefer 10 drinks in 3.5 hours. So you can be clear that the reason why none of their employees saw that Mr. Schaefer was drunk was because they were not properly trained to do so. Patrick Schaefer died that night because the defendant's employees were not properly trained and they failed to detect that he was intoxicated. That brings me to my second point, that the defendant's decision to eliminate their alcohol safety cutoff was a cause of Mr. Schaefer's death. We heard a lot about that policy today, but it was undisputed that when the defendant adopted it 8 years ago, that they put that policy in place to keep their fans safe. By cutting off alcohol sales in the 7th inning, the defendant gave their fans 2 innings to sober up before driving home. But then the defendant decided to change that policy. And Alex Britton told his boss that when he made that change, there was no downside. But Sam Corey told us today there was a downside. And had the defendant have done just a little bit of research, they would have found out about that downside. Because had they have done the research, they would have found out that almost every team in the country stopped serving alcohol in the 7th inning, besides one. They would have found out that no team in America serves alcohol through the 9th inning because it's clearly dangerous to do so. Members of the jury, you also heard from Ashley Husseini today, who tried to convince you that there's no research out there for why it's unsafe to serve alcohol past the 7th inning. But members of the jury, when you came in here today, you weren't asked to leave your common sense at the door. Serving alcohol till it's almost time for fans to go home will clearly make sure that they're going to more likely be drunk when they go home. Members of the jury, Ashley Husseini got up here today and told you that he used to tell people that the 7th inning cutoff was the safety standard. But when it comes to the defendant, it's no longer the industry standard. Ashley Husseini is a hired gun for the defendants, willing to provide the opinion requested for the amount paid. So you may be asking yourself, why would the defendant eliminate a safety policy that they knew would keep their guests safe? But we all know the answer to that question. Money. Alex Britton admitted to you today that the defendant was struggling financially. He told you that his boss threatened that if he didn't find a way to come up with those missed profits, that his boss would find someone else who could. So instead of increasing the price of tickets, instead of increasing the price of merchandise, Alex Britton came up with the idea to eliminate the alcohol safety cutoff. He told you today that his job was not to keep fans safe. It wasn't his responsibility. Members of the jury, the defendant didn't care about the safety of their guests. They only cared about the money. In a few minutes, the judge is going to give you this form. It has a few questions on it. The first question is going to ask you whether or not the defendant's decision to eliminate their alcohol safety policy was negligent, and whether that decision caused Mr. Schaefer's death. And we know, based off the fact that they eliminated a safety cutoff, the answer to that question is yes. The second question is going to ask you whether or not the defendant overserved Mr. Schaefer when he was visibly intoxicated. And we know, based off of Sam Corey's opinion, Sidney Schaefer's testimony, and the toxicology report, that the answer to that question is also yes. Then when you get to that third question, it's going to ask you whether or not Patrick Schaefer was also a cause of his death. And the answer to that question is also yes, because Mr. Schaefer did make a bad decision that night. But members of the jury, keep in mind that the defendant is in the business of selling alcohol. They knew better than anyone else that when people drink, they make bad decisions. And they know that one of those bad decisions is to drive. So we ask you to give the majority of the fault in this case to the defendant, because it was the defendant's stadium. It was the defendant's alcohol. And it was the defendant's dangerous policy. Today, the defendant made important decisions that affect the safety of all of their guests. And those decisions led to Patrick Schaefer's death. Because members of the jury, they ignored the downside. The downside of their policy was death. Find the defendant liable.
Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. What happened to Patrick Schaefer was horrible. And just because I represent the Dragons doesn't mean I'm going to tell you any different. He was a husband, father. It's devastating. But when you took your oaths as jurors, you promised to set sympathy aside and decide this case on the evidence. And the evidence was undisputed. The Dragons didn't choose how much Mr. Schaefer had to drink that night. He did. The Dragons didn't choose for Mr. Schaefer to have 10 drinks and get behind the wheel. He did. That's what this case was about. He chose to drink. He chose to drive. Today, the plaintiff had the burden to prove to you more likely than not that the stadium was responsible for Mr. Schaefer's death. We also took on a burden to show that Patrick Schaefer caused his own death. Throughout this trial, two facts have prevented the plaintiff from meeting their burden and allowed us to meet ours. The park was safe. The plaintiff wasn't. Let's take those one at a time, starting with fact number one. The park was safe. The plaintiff has tried to say that the park was negligent because they sold alcohol past the 7th inning. But there's no county law that requires an alcohol cutoff. No state law, no federal law. Their entire argument comes down to the industry standard. But we know that's not the industry standard for the alcohol service industry. We've all been to bars and restaurants. If we're watching the Phillies at Chickies and Pete's, they don't stop selling you beer in the 7th inning. The plaintiff says, well, that's not the stadium industry standard. That's true. The Dragons' policy was unusual. But as a judge will instruct you, you're not going to be asked if the policy was unusual. They have to prove it was unreasonable. And to do that, they spent most of this trial talking about money, sales, profits. Members of the jury, we've been up front with you. Ms. Gaskins told you in her opening statement, Mr. Britton told you on that stand, and I'll tell you right now. They thought about money, sure. But they never stopped thinking about safety. And when the judge reads you the jury instructions, when you get that verdict form, you're not going to be asked about money. You're not going to be asked why the Dragons changed their policy. You're going to be asked if it was reasonable. And they couldn't prove it was unreasonable. Remember Ms. Gaskins' opening statement, when she asked you to listen for any evidence, that having an alcohol cutoff actually prevents drunk driving. That was 2.5 hours ago. We haven't heard anything. Not one study, not one article. The plaintiff's expert took that stand and told you, we can only imagine how many DUIs there would be if alcohol sales were through the end of the game. Members of the jury, that's exactly the problem with the plaintiff's case. You'd have to imagine, because there's no evidence. But imagine what evidence there would be if having an alcohol cutoff actually prevented drunk driving. We heard that the Baltimore Orioles have sold alcohol past the 7th inning since 1992. That's longer than I've been alive. That's before Google existed. If having an alcohol cutoff actually prevented drunk driving, wouldn't we expect to see a lot of drunk driving after the Orioles games? But no. In those 31 years with those millions of fans, we heard there were only 17 DUIs. Not 17 that caused death, not 17 that caused a crash, 17 DUIs, period. Their expert had to admit there's no evidence that's any different from stadiums with other policies. So then the plaintiff said, well, Patrick Schaefer, he died right after this policy was changed, so that's how we know the policy's dangerous. But members of the jury, we heard the numbers. 51,000 fans, one accident. An accident rate of 0.000002. In their closing just now, the plaintiff spent a lot of time attacking Professor Husseini, but think about it. Do they actually dispute a single fact the professor told us? Does their expert actually dispute a single fact the professor told us? Because their expert took that stand and had to admit, the Orioles have done this. 6 other teams have done this. Yes, there's no research showing that's dangerous. Accident rate, 0.000002. This is your verdict form. Question number 1 asks you if the plaintiff proved by preponderance of the evidence that the Dragons were negligent and that it caused Patrick Schaefer's death. They couldn't prove the policy was unreasonable. You can mark no on question 1. But the plaintiff brought a second claim. That's question number 2 on your verdict form. They're saying that the Dragons served Patrick Schaefer alcohol while he was visibly intoxicated. Members of the jury, visibly intoxicated to who? Because we heard he didn't look drunk to the vendors, the ushers, the security guards, the concession stand workers. They don't remember him at all. Now, you might be thinking, well, of course they're going to say that. They work for the stadium. But there were 38 other people in his section, all interviewed. Did they say, oh, yeah, I remember that one drunk guy in the front row? No. They don't remember him either. The only person who said that Patrick Schaefer was visibly intoxicated was the person bringing this lawsuit. And what did she say? He was speaking loudly. Members of the jury, it was a baseball game. He slurred his words. We heard that was one time, not while ordering, not in front of any employees. He stumbled, he almost fell over. But members of the jury, she had to admit that was after the game had ended, after he had 10 drinks. As a judge will instruct you, they have to prove that he was visibly intoxicated when he was being served, not after. The plaintiff said, well, they were asked if they remembered Patrick Schaefer 4 months after the game. Of course they wouldn't remember him. Members of the jury, who doesn't remember a drunk guy at a baseball game? They're saying he was so drunk, so intoxicated, so out of control that he was stumbling, slurring, talking loudly, that he almost fell over at one point. You'd think one, just one, of those over 40 people asked would remember him. But none of them do. None of them remember him at all. So you can mark no to question 2. And if those are your answers to the first 2 questions, no and no, you're done. But there's one more reason that the law requires a verdict in favor of the Klein County Dragons. That brings us to fact number 2. While the park was safe, the plaintiff wasn't. Members of the jury, it brings us no joy to criticize Patrick Schaefer. But when you point the finger at someone else, the law says we have to evaluate your actions too. And when we evaluate Patrick Schaefer's actions, it's clear he wasn't safe. He chose to drink, then chose to drive. But you don't have to take my word for it. Every piece of evidence that shows Patrick Schaefer's choices was brought to us by the plaintiff's own witnesses. He chose what to drink. You'll see the receipts. Vodka, 12-ounce beer, 24-ounce beer, his wife's beer. He chose how much to drink. 10 drinks in one game. He chose when to drink, in the 8th inning, in the 9th, right before he got behind the wheel. Members of the jury, the plaintiff's expert has said, well, none of this is Mr. Schaefer's responsibility. This is all on the stadium. A moment ago, the plaintiff told you, when you walked in this courtroom, you didn't leave your common sense at the door. We agree. Common sense tells you that the Dragons didn't force Mr. Schaefer to drink all that alcohol. Common sense tells you that he chose those 10 alcoholic drinks. Those were his choices. The plaintiff said, well, there was a family emergency that night. He had to drive. There was nothing else they could do. Members of the jury, there's 2 problems with that. Number 1, it's not true. We heard that Ms. Schaefer had less than a third of what her husband had to drink that night. Why couldn't she drive? But more importantly, that's not the law. The legal limit in Pennsylvania is 0.08. Patrick Schaefer's BAC was 0.18. We all sympathize with the Schaefers and their desire to get back to their children. But that doesn't make it safe for them. It doesn't make it safe for everyone else on that road. When your BAC is more than twice the legal limit, you are not fit to drive. when your BAC is more than twice the legal limit, you're not allowed to drive. Just a moment ago, the plaintiff told you Mr. Schaefer did make a bad decision. We agree. They told you when people drink, they make bad decisions. We agree. They're responsible for those decisions. Question 3 on the verdict form asks if the Dragons prove by preponderance of the evidence that Patrick Schaefer was negligent and that it played a part in his own death. It was negligent to drive drunk. And both parties agree. Driving drunk caused his crash. You can mark yes on question 3. Now, if you've agreed with us so far, you won't need to get to question 4. But I don't want to be presumptuous, so let's go through this one together. This one asks you to assign the percentage of fault to each party. Members of the jury, however you decide to divide responsibility between the two parties, the number next to Mr. Schaefer should be higher than the number next to the Dragons. Because when it came to the drinking, every drink the stadium sold him was one that he chose to order. And when it came to the driving, that was a decision that cannot be split down the middle. Having 10 alcoholic drinks and getting behind the wheel, that decision was Mr. Schaefer's and Mr. Schaefer's alone. In April of last year, 51,000 fans went to Dragons games. 51,000 fans served by the same vendors, 51,000 fans under the same alcohol policy. There was one accident. We ask that you find the Klein County Dragons not liable because Patrick Schaefer chose to drink and Patrick Schaefer chose to drive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor, before rebuttal, maybe we can please ask for a time check from the bailiff.
5 minutes.
Thank you.
Whenever you're ready.
All right.
Yes.
Bailiff, if you don't mind, would you mind moving to the jury box and just giving a 1-minute signal?
Not at all.
Thank you.
May I proceed?
Yes, please.
The defendant just got up here and blamed the man who lost his life because of their negligent policy. They try to diminish Mr. Schaefer's life to mere numbers. They told you all about the data that you didn't see that talked about why drunk driving doesn't happen through the 9th inning. But how many lives does it take for us to find out that this policy isn't safe? They talked to you all about choices. The choices that Mr. Schaefer made that night. But what about their choices? The defendant made the choice to eliminate the alcohol safety policy. A choice that we know was negligent because the overwhelming majority of stadiums follow this policy. That tells you that it's more likely than not that if they're not going with this policy, then they're being unreasonable. The defendant tried to tell you that no one saw Mr. Schaefer intoxicated, none of the employees. But the judge is going to tell you soon that it doesn't matter whether the employees saw him, just as long as someone saw him. That toxicology report told you that Mr. Schaefer was at a 0.15. The overwhelming majority of people at 0.15 show visible signs of intoxication. So we'd have to think that Mr. Schaefer is likely in that majority. The defense got up here and talked a lot about personal responsibility. But that responsibility goes both ways. The defendant's establishment is not the only establishment that's been held accountable for how much alcohol they sell and how they sell it. And you can believe they're not going to be the last one. When a stadium decides to service their fans with alcohol, they must do so responsibly. But that's not what the defendant did here. Because they didn't follow the industry standard. And they overserved Mr. Schaefer that night. They ignored the downsides. Because the downside to their policy was death. Find the defendant liable for Patrick Schaefer's death.
Thank you.
Just waiting on one. No rush, though.
Somebody move this, please. Thank you.
All right, we have all the ballots, and so I'm going to ask our, I don't think so. I'm going to ask our scoring judges to pass the microphone around, introduce themselves, and tell the advocates what their favorite moment from the trial was.
Hi, I'm Bill Brennan. I'm a criminal trial lawyer here in Philadelphia. You guys were great. It was like a tennis match. I watched Mr. Dhari, and I'd be fascinated. Then I watched Miss Gaskins and Miss Camper Young, and even when Kensington in her closing made McMonagle and I feel like dinosaurs, says you weren't born in '92, but you guys were terrific. And the thing that I just feel everybody, we shouldn't have to score. It should just be, everybody should get a 10. But I was sitting here thinking, if I was in a federal courtroom and some young assistant came in, it was one of you four, like, would it make sense? And each and every one of you are just fantastic. Like, you just, the command of the courtroom and the knowledge of the facts, and it just, I was totally blown away. So I think you're all going to be great lawyers.
I'm Brian McMonagle. I'm an attorney here in Philadelphia. I've been judging these competitions for decades, longer than you've been alive. And I have to tell you, this was the most outstanding round I have ever judged. You people are remarkable, and our profession's in great shape. You really brought a smile to our faces, and you've touched us, and we will remember you, I can assure you. So congratulations and best of luck.
Hi, guys. I'm Angie Halem, also a criminal defense attorney here in Philadelphia. Fantastic job. What an honor to be over here watching you guys do your thing. Just spectacular. I would say my favorite moment is when you lost the motion in limine and you were aggressive and you saw your opening and you got to get into the thing that the judge told you couldn't get into. That's classic. We live for those moments as trial lawyers, right? Great jobs, guys. I echo everything that Brian and Bill said. Just fantastic.
Hi, I'm Mary DeFusco. I'm the Director of Training at the Defender Association here in Philadelphia. And I echo everything that my fellow attorneys have said. Just really, really a remarkable thing. I'm trying to follow the directions. So there were so many wonderful, wonderful things. So what I'm going to do is just focus on opening statement. And for the plaintiff, loved the hand gestures, the up and the down. And for the defense, absolutely love the use of present tense. A lot of things that I tell my students as well, try to get into the present tense when you're telling your story. Beautifully done all the way through the trial, all four attorneys. Excellent, excellent.
My name's Joe Crawford. I'm celebrating my 44th very fortunate anniversary today of the first day walking in to be a lawyer. And I can't think of a more inspiring way to do that, and I'll never forget, than to see what the four of you did. And please remember that we have to try to rank, but we know we're ranking excellence. And in the four of you, that's exactly what we were doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My name's Carla Benz. I'm also a criminal defense lawyer. I feel like that's what the majority is here. It wasn't that long ago that I was in your shoes. I feel like the last 12 years have flown by, but you are all wonderful. And I think you're going to do really great things. In terms of being inspirations, no matter what you decide to do, being a lawyer is hard work. And there are many days where you might question your decision. And that's why I like to do things like this, because it is inspiring and it brings me back and reminds me just how wonderful and awesome this profession is. And you guys are all going to do so well. So congratulations.
51 years ago, I was in your shoes. I've been doing plaintiff's trial work for 51 years. You all did a great job. What I was very impressed about is themes. And especially the defense, you started, you ended with the same theme, right? That's very important. And the plaintiffs, you did the same job. Sometimes, though, it was a little unclear. It's difficult. And you all had great poise, and you all comported yourselves really well, and you all be great trial lawyers.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Varghese Kurian. I know the judge asked us for favorite moments. I just thought there was just so many. Like, you guys were just so great. I was just so impressed by how you were able to pivot when things changed, right? Like when a ruling didn't go your way or was sustained or overruled, and you're like, all right, let me just move on and get through to the next point. I thought it was excellently done. I thought you guys were all just so well in command of your subject matter and knew every single point. And then, again, when a witness said something a little bit different than what you expected, you were able to get right back onto your game plan. So I thought you guys did an excellent job. So congratulations.
Well, I was a judge for 30 years down in City Hall. And over that time, I'm sure I saw 10,000 trial lawyers, literally. And everybody over there was so effusive that I feel like I have to be honest and realistic with you. You were all great. You can come into my courtroom anytime you want.
Thank you, Judge. How about a round of applause for our two teams? Let me just say one more time, thank you to our scoring panel, to Judge Bernstein for being here. This is just an excellent panel. We've had some good panels at this event, but none like this. I'm just really grateful for your time and for being here. Let me introduce all of you and the people that are watching to these two teams. The team from Team 104, the plaintiff, is from Loyola, Los Angeles, and the defense, Team 105, is from the UCLA School of Law. Now, this is the 6th annual Battle of the Experts, so we have a little bit of history. And these two teams are excellent, from excellent trial advocacy programs, and they've done really well at this event. These two teams have made the playoffs at this event more times than any other team that's ever been here. So this really was the Clash of the Titans. Two schools from LA, so they really didn't need to come to Philadelphia, I guess, to hash this one out, but that's all right. We have a nice courtroom. This was a tremendous final round. I feel like I say this every single year, but I think this was our best final round yet. So with no further ado, the winner of the 2023 Battle of the Experts for the 4th consecutive year, UCLA. And just one more round of applause from our team from Loyola. They were just so fantastic, and this was a great final round. Congratulations, guys. I'll have you on. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. We'll see you next year.
Good seeing you. Good seeing you. Good seeing you again. Oh, thank you.
Appreciate it.
That's a good point. I don't know. How do I turn it on? Well, I mean, imagine if you just press N.